begins with Zacharias and Elizabeth and John the Baptist. And these three people, Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth, and John and Jesus, represent the progress of our regeneration. Zacharias and Elizabeth were good people. It says so. They walked in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. But at the same time, they didn't have a child, and Zacharias was a priest in a temple, in a church that would later crucify Jesus. So there was sort of a contradiction there. Zacharias represents the first kind of goodness that we have, the goodness of our upbringing. That is, what happens when you're brought up by your parents, perhaps by parents who are not very religious, but you're taught good principles. And so therefore, he is the first kind of goodness that we have. But you know, a lot of our lives, we live a fairly good life, but we're feeling somewhat hopeless about ourselves. Many people feel that they haven't done much that's worthwhile. They're not truly good people. How in the world, they might think, can we become angels? There are many times in a lot of people's lives when they feel hopeless about their life. When they leave this life, they feel, what will they have done that's worth talking about? When they leave this life, what will they find in the other world? And so they feel quite hopeless. And for many, many years, they don't know that they will have accomplished anything. Jesus came to bring hope to the hopeless, to assure those who feel that they're not worthwhile, who feel that when they die there will be no useful remembrance of them, that this is not true. They are worth so much in his loving eyes. And he can put joy and purpose into their lives. The story of Zacharias and Elizabeth is the story of a hopeless longing, but with a good ending. A longing that gave way to unbelievable hope. And finally, total joy. Now remember that these two people were good. It is said that they were righteous before God, walking in all the commandments of the Lord blameless. And yet they didn't have the one thing that they wanted: a child. And Zacharias was a priest in a church which later crucified the Lord. Quite a contrast, isn't it? But it describes our lives before the Lord truly touches us. Zacharias represents the good with which we grow up. If we're given some worthwhile principles, we're fairly righteous people. We don't deliberately lie or steal or commit adultery or destroy other people. People would say of us that they're good people, really nice people. But you know, the goodness of our upbringing, of our environment, is very flawed. Let's take a somewhat critical look of the, quote, values of the world we grow up in. Many people are taught to be kind to ourselves, themselves, and their friends first, and sometimes that translates into an unspoken contempt of people who are not like them. Jealousy of those more fortunate is a very natural feeling. As we struggle to make our ends meet. Around us, people react with surliness or temper or character assassination if things don't go their way. And although we seem reasonable, we are tempted to do this. Moodiness strikes people, and those around us suffer from it, and we don't really know how to fight it. People find a somewhat shameful pleasure in discussing the weakness of others, even gossiping about them. People love their children and try to raise them, but often their weaknesses hurt the children. Take a different example. A woman learns of hunger, even starvation in an African country. She is touched by her good natural feelings, her upbringing, and she joins a group that is working to get food to them. But then the leader of the group annoys her, and so she stops working for them. Her sympathy for the starving people doesn't survive a blow to her pride. You see, if the good of our environment is all we have, it will grow old. It wears out like Zacharias and Elizabeth thought they were. It's not that we're being actively bad, but what's happened to the youthful longing we had to be special people, to do worthwhile things, to make a good mark in the world, to go to heaven. Zacharias and Elizabeth longed for a child who represents that heaven. And to them, their baby was important because it was a kind of immortality to them. In those days, they didn't know anything about the life after death. They thought their immortality was in the children they had, and so on. In a similar way, we long to have a real, growing goodness inside of ourselves. That's a child, which is the beginning of our heaven, our eternity. Now, the good of our environment, like the good of Zacharias' worn-out church, promises very little for the future. Sometimes when we look at ourselves, we wonder what the future will hold. You see, for a lot of our lives, we live without real thought about God and what He wants. Even if we go to church, we don't think about the Lord day to day very much. People try to find their way in the world by themselves, and it doesn't work too well. We think we can build our happiness, but we can't. And they had no child, for Elizabeth was barren, and they both now were well stricken in years. Elizabeth, the values of our environment is not going to be productive for very long. So the spiritual story of Zacharias is addressed to people who feel that they aren't really that good, who feel bad about themselves, even as they try to live reasonably good lives. Now, there is a special point to the story that we may not have noticed. Zacharias kept praying for a child, even after his wife had apparently gone through menopause, because the angel said to him, "Fear not, for your prayer is heard." He had not given up, even though he kind of felt that he had given up. And he would have said that he had given up. We've got that too. Even though we think we're not much good, we long deeply, privately, to become better. I don't want to go into all the stories about the parts about the angel and what he said to them. Just say that in everyone's life, the Lord sends angels, special messages to us, into our minds. He does it many times. A belief that there can be something better in our lives, that there is a goodness better than the goodness which we presently have. He stirs us often to feel that if we turn to God, then things can be different. These moments of hope are sent to us by the Lord in his great mercy. They make us feel different, that maybe we can make something more out of our lives. Everyone has them. What is this hope that comes to us? Zacharias represents the goodness of our upbringing, which grows old. But John, his son, represents the first good of obedience to God. It is simply this. Up to now, I've been doing good because people will think well of me and maybe I'll get a reward and so on. But now, I believe the Lord can give me the power to change. I'll obey him because he'll build new loves and strengths, new purpose into my life. The teachings of the new church put it simply. They say that we have been raised to be kind and good people, but without a belief in the Lord's power and obedience to him, our goodness is weak. It grows old. It gets sullied by selfish motives. We're good because it's good for us, not good for others. But they say, make a simple, basic change. Do good from now on and shun your faults from now on because God tells you. That's the reason, simply that, because God tells you. And his power and his presence will produce a new life, a new joy inside of you. Here is the quote, the reading of our fourth lesson. Conscience is not the product of natural or hereditary good. It is a product of teaching about what is true and good and a life based on that teaching. Through such teaching and life, people have principles stamped on their character, and they receive a conscience, which is the basis or foundation for heaven to flow into. The way for heaven, our lesson says, is ridiculous simple. Do good because your God commands it. Then he will give you the power to reject sullied motives. The promise of John the Baptist stands for the Lord's promise of a new motivation in our minds and hearts that will make heaven inside of us. Consider the woman who was working to help starving people in Africa. Then the leader of the organization annoys her. She's tempted to stop working for the group. How dare she say that to me when I have done so much here, she thinks. She asks herself, not that. She asks herself what the Lord expects of her. And straight away, it's different. She knows that she has to help starving people still, and not to stop just because of a bad-tempered leader. That would be wrong. But still, Zacharias doubted. It just can't be, he said. I'm an old, and my wife is too old. Show me a sign. Prove it. Often, far too often, we have this kind of feeling. We get hopeful about making changes in our lives, and then the hells whisper, nope, it can't happen. You'll just go on being the sort of good, sort of selfish, mean person you've always been. Many are they who say of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. And the angel was a little angry and said that the sign he was seeking would be given. He would be done unable to speak until the day when the promise was fulfilled. Think of Zacharias going back to his home, speechless for month after month. But think of this. He went home with hope. He made love to his wife, hoping again for a child. And the miracle happened. Just like in us, the tiny life began to grow within her. Imagine the joy they both had. But all the time he was dumb. What does that dumbness mean? Put simply, it represents our awareness, if we start to follow our religion, that if we don't keep going and if we don't obey, then nothing that we speak will be worth saying. We don't want to go back to where we were because, in effect, we will then just grow old and die, and nothing will have mattered deeply enough to speak of. A person who commits to religion feels, if I stop striving for goodness, I may as well never speak. There's another point about the story. Zacharias obeyed the angel, and a new life began to grow. The beloved boy, the Lord puts it this way: it shall now be told how a civil and moral life is a receptacle of spiritual life. Live according to moral and civil laws, just as you were before, in effect, it says, not only as civil and moral laws, but also as divine laws, and you will be a spiritual person. The civil and moral person obeys these laws, thus that he may be, or she may be, or they seem to be a good citizen. But if we do not also regard these laws as divine, we are merely civil and moral natural people. While if we also regard them as divine, we become civil and moral spiritual people. We're doing the same thing, but for a different motive, because God said it. The difference is of the latter is both, the difference is that this latter, the spiritual person, is both a citizen, a good citizen of the earthly kingdom, and a good citizen of the heavenly kingdom, while the former is a good citizen of the earthly kingdom only, and not of the heavenly kingdom. The difference is seen in the goods that they do. The goods done by civil and moral natural people are not in themselves good, for the person and the world are in them. The goods done by civil and moral spiritual people are good in themselves, because the Lord and heaven are in them. This is done simply by our acknowledging God and doing evil, not doing evil because it is against God, but doing good because it agrees with God. Then a spirit enters into your civil and moral activities, and they live. Otherwise, there is no spirit in them, and therefore they are not living. The little baby growing beside Elizabeth represents this new living spirit in our lives when we do good simply because God told us to. And there's one other thing about this. If God says, don't do this or do that, it is absolute. It's not a percentage thing, right sometimes and not others. It is 100% true. And there's another touching part about the story. Elizabeth hid herself for 5 months. She kept the joy to herself. Perhaps she was afraid she would miscarry. But it didn't seem so, for she spoke in hiding, saying that the Lord had looked on her and taken away the disgrace she felt at having been barren. She was just so relieved, but it was her secret. 5 months represents a little time at the beginning. And for the secret happiness growing in our hearts, when we find that really we can make meaningful changes in our lives, is what is felt at that time. We keep it to ourselves in some ways, almost afraid that we'll lose this ability. But as Elizabeth's baby grew and grew, so our ability to do what we know is right grows in us. So in summary, the story of John the Baptist. Many, if not most of us, feel hopeless about ourselves at different times in our lives. We're trying to do what is right, but we let all sorts of lower emotions spoil our efforts. So we live with a secret, often secret feeling that we're not really very good people. And the hells love this. They love it because it makes us miserable. They love it because it makes us stop trying to be different. I'll always be the way I am. Look at my past, we feel. The wonderful message of Christmas is that the Lord can give to us His almighty power. And that's the only thing that can overcome hell. No one of any religion will go to hell unless they freely choose thousands of times to have unselfish thoughts and feelings. And if they want to change at any time, not right before death, but a little before death, He can make it happen. And the introductory story of Christmas is about something that seemed hopeless. The birth of a special baby. But it happened. We don't have to go along in the same way. The essential of religion is that you can live and love forever for sure if you follow the Lord. Spiritual dumbness is saying, nothing is ever worth remembering if I don't keep trying to follow Him, and I can do it. And then I can speak from the newfound strength that is given me, as Zacharias spoke and prophesied. And this is only the beginning. Just as John was not the Messiah, obedience is not heaven. For the birth of Jesus Christ represents the dawning of true love in our hearts. John paved the way for the Lord. And our willingness to make changes in our lives, which the Word shows, paves the way for Him to come into us and give us unselfish love for others. That is heaven. That is God with us. Amen. Would you rise? And now to the one only God, Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory and dominion forever and ever.